This is the strange thing to get your head around, is that this is a method of producing fashion which is closer to brewing beer or making food than, you know, any kind of traditional textile process. Yes, this is fading now. It's not as strong as it was as when it came off the laser cutter. But there's no smell really once they've been dyed. Yeah. When it's come straight out of the vat and it's wet, it smells sugary, sweet. Once this was dried down, we created a pattern for the laser cutter. And it's based on the bacteria and the yeast cells that were used to create the material itself. So the long rod shape here, I mean, it's kind of an abstraction, but the rod shape is the bacteria, and then there are rounder ones that represent the yeast cells that were used. So, you know, the pattern is somewhat abstract, but it's to represent actually how the material was made in the first place. We collaborate with all sorts of other companies, scientists who are growing materials in the lab using living organisms. And we're helping them to take those materials from the lab to the market. So how do we take these living materials, or these materials that have been made from living organisms, and imagine the future products for fashion, for apparel, for sportswear? That's what we do. We're a design consultancy.
The clothing industry has grown heavily reliant on precious natural resources, be it cotton picked from gigantic fields in India or nylon derived from petroleum products. Once the fabric has been manufactured, cut, sewed, and finished into ready-to-wear clothing, most of its leftovers are simply disposed of, creating a chain of waste in each step of the process. But with bioengineered clothing, we have an opportunity to reduce the impact of these old world practices.
When you think about something like fermentation and a living organism, there's kind of no waste, because it's producing both the fibre, organising that into a material for you, and then ultimately, potentially, what you're looking at is being able to grow that material onto the form that you want it to take shape as. Right now, we're not genetically engineering that bacteria to produce the material for us. But the future will be about designing the bacteria to spin the thread, to give it the qualities that we want. So if we want it to repel water, we design that into the cell. If we want it to deliver some kind of nutritious quality to your skin, perhaps, that could all be designed into the material. How do you figure out what we're going to be wearing in 50 years? Well, one way of thinking about that is by talking to scientists and engineers who are working in the lab today on new experimental materials or new ways of thinking about manufacture. 90% of the planet is covered in cellulose material. Everybody's so excited about 3D printing, but what I'm excited about is not today's 3D printing, which is still using oil-based petrochemical nasty plastics and filling the world with more plastic. You know, plastic is my nemesis, you know. I want it to be organic and natural and compostable. Most people in fashion textiles are not hanging out with scientists, you know, really doing geeky research and, you know, asking these questions. Because, you know, fashion is actually just concerned with what's happening in the next 5 minutes. And that's become, you know, increasingly the case over the last sort of 20 years. You know, the time frames for thinking and, you know, making stuff happen in fashion have got shorter and shorter and shorter. It's why we call it fast fashion now, you know. There is no time for R&D in fashion.
the last 100 years, clothing has transformed from the traditional made-to-order into the mass-produced, standard-sized, and fixed-priced of today, where, more often than not, it's designed in one country, manufactured in another, and sold worldwide. This model, known as fast fashion, has completely changed the face of the industry. So much that in the years between 2000 and 2010, our consumption of textiles increased a staggering 47%. But while new styles at low prices are abundant, this relentless production and consumption is accused of having a much higher cost on the environment.
I've been a mountaineer and a climber since I was 15 years old. And people sometimes ask me, what's your favorite climb? And that's hard to answer because there's a lot of favorite climbs. But one of the ones that I remember best, that I loved the most, was a route on Mount Kenya in East Africa, the second highest mountain in Kenya. It was a magical climb. Right on the equator, a ribbon of ice that required ice axes and crampons, and it was difficult. It was very steep, and there was one place, in fact, where you had to go behind a hanging curtain of ice and actually go inside an ice cave and climb up and chop your way out of the top of it and exit onto the summit. It was like magical. But magical as it was, it's in the past tense, because now, with climate change, the ice is all melted and the ice window is gone. Like, it's just not there anymore. It fell off. All the ice just fell off the mountain. So that's like a dagger in your heart when that's one of your favorite climbs in the world and it's not there anymore because of climate change. How did we end up with fast fashion? Where did this come from? Perhaps the answer is in the ability of companies to deliver fashion faster and faster. You know, with the ability to deliver inexpensive clothes because they're made in places where the costs are the lowest and they can be turned around with the fastest speed possible and change weekly or monthly. Maybe that's just from having that capability, you end up with fast fashion because, you know, that satisfies a desire and a need in people. If that's the case, then it's that desire from the consumer that's driving it. And that's where the change has to come from.
Since 2005, Rick has been responsible for environmental initiatives at Patagonia. The outdoor clothing company, founded by a fellow rock climber 40 years earlier, took an environmental approach from the outset. Among other things, they commit 1% of their annual sales to environmental groups and have founded programs to help and encourage consumers to recycle their clothes. In 2011, Rick and his team launched an advertising campaign with a consumption message that goes against everything you learn at business school.
So what about this, folks? In the most potent environmental appeal of the season, Patagonia just placed a full-page ad in the New York Times on the holiest of sales days, Black Friday. Don't buy this jacket, says the headline, along with the retailer's R2 code. The ad asks people to think twice before buying Patagonia products, since our clothing consumption, as stated in the copy, puts the economy of natural systems that support all life firmly in the red. Well, how's that for a Black Friday ad?
The campaign to try to convince our customers to buy just what they need came out of the recession that began in 2009, when we started to realize that people were responding to the recession by redefining their relationship to stuff, including clothing. And there were a number of people that were recognizing that you actually save money if you buy things that last longer and you buy fewer of them as a consequence. And we wanted to figure out, well, how can we provide a service to those people? I was able to convince Yvon Chouinard, who owns the company, that he wanted to do this. But then it took both of us to convince others inside the company quite a while, especially the people in sales and merchandising. You can imagine, you go to them and say, well, we want to run this ad to ask people not to buy our stuff unless they really need it. And they go, you want to do what? They think you're crazy. But then you have to explain the reason for it. And you have to bring it into the context of the company's responsibility to the environment. It's not don't buy the jacket, but it's don't buy the jacket if you don't need it. And that's what the real message is. That's what we're asking people to think about. You know, of buying just what you need, of taking care of it, fixing it, reselling it if you're not using it, recycling it when it's completely worn out. And the fact is that our sales went up after that ad, and they've continued to go up, and the company's continued to grow. But we hope it's growing because more people are buying our products because they last a long time, and that they're listening to what we have to say about consumption and deciding in their own lives to not buy as much stuff if they don't really need it. I'm a little suspect about making any product that is climate positive, but it's possible to make it approaching climate neutral. But even there, that's a very, very difficult chore, not only with consumer goods, but even with food. You know, take food as an example. Farmers have been trying to develop farming techniques that use no more energy than the sun can put back on the land, and they can't do it. Manufactured goods are even more of an impact than farming with those kinds of technologies. So you maybe can't make clothes that are climate neutral or climate positive, but you can certainly make clothes that have an absolute minimum impact on climate change.
Even though the planet has activists like Rick in its defense, their actions risk being just a drop in the ocean. Every year, the process of water dyeing our textiles disposes the equivalent of half a Mediterranean Sea into our rivers and streams. Add to that the 200,000 tons of toxic chemicals that escape wastewater treatment and end up in those very same waterways. That environmental impact, while huge, comes solely from adding color to textiles.
I was travelling through China doing a factory visit, and I was driving through an area that was farming watermelons. Up until that point, I ate a lot of watermelons until I drove past the river that was feeding the watermelons the water. Nobody would want to drink anything from that stream. And obviously, you know, the impact of industrial factories in the area was just polluting the farming, and people were obviously eating that. So I think it's visual things like that that make me really passionate about what I'm doing.
Sophie Mather is a former head of innovation at Nike Asia and an industry expert when it comes to sustainable textiles. A few years ago, she began working together with the Ye Group, a Bangkok-based textile manufacturer and pioneers of a revolutionary new technology called dry dye, a solution that can color fabrics without using a single drop of water.